I think everybody should be okay with that. So, and actually as I go through some of the organs, I'll pull up certain things, and as you review things, you should be able to do both epithelium, connective tissue, do as many of the tissues that you can see in the slide as possible. So it'll be easy for us to maybe do multiple things as we're going through some of the slides. So let's get going. Okay, so hopefully, as soon as you saw this big round structure called glomerulus, you know right away, well, I know a couple of things are going to be tested there. So you can look at it. So obviously if we come in and point to, I'm using the cross, so I point to this epithelium lining this free space. See the nuclei, flattened or squamous in shape. There's only one layer of them here. This is our example of simple squamous epithelium. And then when you look around the rest of the slide, examples like this one, like this, you see further examples of what would be simple cuboidal epithelium. You can see where the nuclei are. You can see how the cell, here would be about where cell boundary would be, another one here. You kind of picture the boundaries between the cells and see that their height, width, whatever, it's all basically the same. It's a little cube. So an example is simple cuboidal. There's only one layer of cells, cuboidal in shape, simple cuboidal. Okay? And on the lab quizzes, anything that we do, we'll give you really good examples. It's not going to be one that you're trying to decide is it cuboidal or columnar. It's kind of like this one. Maybe you kind of think it's starting to get columnar in shape. It'd be a really nice example. So squamous, cuboidal in shape on this one. Okay? We probably didn't make you learn it here, but so I'm going to do it to you. Okay. Here we see an epithelium that is multiple layers in thickness. And what is the shape of the outermost cells? Really strange. Big old puffy balloon-shaped cells. You can call them whatever you want, but this is an example of transitional epithelium. It's not going to be stratified something because this is an epithelium that transitions in state from being balloon-shaped, as it is here in the relaxed state, to squamous in the fully distended state, and we only do this relaxed state transitional epithelium. So when you look at this, these big puffy cells on the outermost layer are a dead giveaway for that. Now, when we look deep to this, there's connective tissue below it. And what you'll see here, almost always, there's a rare exceptions, but almost always when you look directly beneath an epithelium, you'll find loose connective tissue. So you'll see plenty of collagen fibers, but lots more cells than what you would see for dense irregular. So you go through here, you'll see lots of cells, not as many fibers. You don't see the packing in of the fibers like you do in other areas. Okay? And typically when you look around like blood vessels, these are all small cut pieces through blood vessels. All this area in here around these blood vessels are also examples of where you would see some loose connective tissue. Scattered amongst areas, like if you focused in, like on here, okay, you see other areas and some other organs we'll do later where you can very obviously see dense irregular. Here it's all shredded up pretty much, but all this connective tissue in here is dense irregular connective tissue. Lots and lots of fibers, very few cells. The only cells that would be present would be examples of fibroblasts. Okay? This other stuff is muscle, not anything we've had so far. So as you scan around things, when you see those pockets of a fair amount of cells with the pink fibers around it, all this pink is collagen fibers. So this stuff is all examples of loose connective tissue. Okay? And right underneath an epithelium, typically, loose connective tissue. Okay, this organ is also another example of where you would see transitional epithelium. Again, when you look at the outer surface, you see this kind of dome-shaped, irregularly shaped epithelium. So you just need to get the feel for how it looks in, say, bladder versus ureter here. Don't worry about the organ, but you know it's a stratified tissue. You look at the outermost shape of the outermost layer of cells, irregularly kind of dome or puppy-shaped cells. This again, transitional epithelium. Then when you look directly beneath that, all this tissue right in here, here's lots of cells packed amongst some pink collagen fibers. Again, loose connective tissue versus whenever you get over here in like an area like this. Densely packed collagen fibers. Here's a fibroblast, only a few cells around it. This would be a nice example of what your dense irregular connective tissue would look like. Okay, much thicker bundles of pink collagen fibers, a few scattered cells throughout it, typically fibroblasts. Whereas when you look up here in the loose connective tissue, there's typically all kinds of different cell types that can be present inside of there. Lots of them will be fibroblasts, but then you'll see other cells as well, particularly in some of our other slides where you can see the invasion of like inflammatory cells. Here's a different cell. It's actually a plasma cell. You can't tell very well, but it would be one. So there's all kinds of cell types present in that loose connective tissue. Lots of dense irregular below that. As you go around, you'll see different areas of dense irregular. And then around vessels, nerve bundles and things, you'll find pockets of loose connective tissue. So some loose connective tissue kind of around there, but right underneath here, definitely loose connective tissue, dense irregular connective tissue.
Question: is that right underneath? Would that be basement membrane right there?
The question is, this pink strip that's going through here, would that structure be a basement membrane? For your purposes, the answer is yes. Okay?
For our lab exam, we're not going to know what tissue it came from. Like what
You will not know. It's not going to be a slide labeled ureter, monkey.
All right.
No, not at all. But again, don't sit here and try and memorize epithelium or whatever based upon its location. For the lab purposes, know what it looks like, and you'll never go wrong. And really, while you're sitting here looking at stuff, you're better served not even looking up there at that and just trying to get a feel for what you're looking at on these slides. So here's an example. Obviously, free surfaces and epithelium of some sort. It extends from here all the way out, so it's definitely a stratified tissue. Okay, and then what's the shape of the outermost layers of cells? When you look out here, you can see it's all flattened cells. Even though you see some of it kind of ruffling off as you scan around, and we would give you a spot where you can definitely see like this, where there's nuclei all the way out to the surface. It's not a dead layer of cells out here. This would be stratified squamous, non-keratinized epithelium, and you need to make sure that you include that keratinized or non-keratinized whenever you're identifying stratified squamous epithelium. Okay? Stratified squamous, non-keratinized. You can always tell because there are viable nuclei all the way out to the outer surface of that tissue. When we see stratified squamous keratinized in a minute, there'll be a thick layer of dead squames of cells on that outer surface. So all this, doesn't matter what these cell shapes look like, it's all about that outermost layer of cells. Okay? And then, as typical, just deep to and supporting this epithelium, you can see this pink tissue in here. Really tell nicely here, it's loose connective tissue. You don't have a real big thick layer of it here underneath where this is at like you do in some other places because of how this organ's arranged. But this is all loose connective in here. Then we'll get into some dense connective tissue out in here. Okay? Pockets of muscle y'all don't care anything about right now. We wouldn't go into all that shredded tissue and ask you stuff in there. But even when you look around, you'll see typically around these blood vessels, there's some nerve fibers in here. All this stuff in here is loose connective tissue surrounding this blood vessel, this blood vessel. So you'll find all those little pockets of it. As we scan around, let's see if I can find something. Again, same sort of thing. Oops, let's do it a little bit back. Maybe we would blow up a place like this. I could scan around for a while, but I don't want to. First off, you see cells that are long and not very wide. What you're trying to look at when you first look at this is, I can't tell if it's simple or stratified. Well, this is real easy because y'all don't have to know stratified columnar. So if you see columnar cells going out here to the surface like this, it's going to be simple columnar. And we would put it on a better spot than that so you could tell, you know, like, and again, you can see simple columnar epithelium. Okay? Hopefully, if this were labeled, nobody would miss this little guy right here. So this structure is a unicellular gland called a goblet cell. This one here, you kind of see the base. It doesn't reach out to the surface, but you see simple columnar epithelium with goblet cells scattered through it. And then here's epithelium on one side, epithelium on the other side, and then in between the two layers of epithelium, this is kind of like a finger-like structure that has an inner core. All this is loose connective tissue. And here you see lots and lots of cells. You don't see hardly any or as much pink collagen fiber scattered throughout this. So if we keep working our way down, we'll get down here to the base, and all this stuff in this area is loose connective tissue, still loose connective tissue. Lots and lots of cells, pink collagen fibers. It's all about kind of ratio of cells to fibers. When you get in dense irregular, it's going to be big bundles, you know, almost like a little small spot. This is not, all this is loose. Very few cells, lots and lots of big bundles of fibers and dense irregular connective tissue. So if we worked our way down, big, huge bundles of pink collagen. It's all shredded, I understand, but if you look down in here, lots and lots of collagen, very few cells kind of scattered throughout it, nice fibroblast, long, skinny, spindle-shaped cell, dense, irregular connective tissue. And then you'll get back into pockets of, here's some more dense, irregular, and there's also some spots of loose connective tissue. So you contrast how you got big bundles of fibers versus in here, there's still collagen fiber bundles, but they're smaller in size. You have a lot more cells interspersed amongst it. You see how this cell type is different than some of these other cells. So several different, this cell's different, this cell's different, this cell's different. Okay? Whereas usually in here it's just fibroblasts. Okay, a couple things to be aware when you look at a slide like this one. All these structures are the same. They're all just weird cross sections through a structure just like this one, or just like this one. These are examples of your simple tubular gland, so it looks just kind of like a little test tube when you see it from this view. So here's a simple tubular gland. So while I'm at this mag, this here you see there's just almost tons and tons of goblet cells all throughout this. That's what all those little pale staining spots are. And then when you look in between the tubes, all this stuff in here is loose connective tissue. Lots of cells, amongst the pink collagen fibers. Okay? So the reason why there's so many cells in here is just because it's inflamed and you got a lot of inflammatory cells present. But simple tubular gland, if we magnify this up further, you probably, if we scanned around a while, you could probably find and be able to tell that it's simple columnar epithelium, but it's always harder to do. Here's simple columnar cells. It's harder to do in this one because there's so many goblet cells all over the place that it gives it kind of a strange appearance to it. But you have, every so often, these simple columnar cells interspersed amongst all the different goblet cells. Okay, so goblet cells, I know they don't look like the classic goblet cell, but we'll show you one that's got the nice little purple stem for the nucleus and everything else in a lab practical. Okay, and then all this is connective tissue, lamina propria. Oh, sorry, just connective tissue, loose connective tissue. Sorry, getting ahead of myself here, teaching you stuff you don't have to know. But you can see all the different cell types. You see a lot of these cells with these red granules inside of it. You'll learn what those are soon enough. Lots and lots of those. Let's talk about that for a minute. If you see a cell out here in this loose connective tissue like this that has, we call this clock face nucleus. So it's almost like there's that at the cross, there's the center of the dial, and then you would see that clumped heterochromatin around the outside of it. Unfortunately, that one doesn't have much of the clumped heterochromatin around it. But you see plenty of the other cells have it around their periphery. Those are all examples of plasma cells. And there's no saying if that'll be on there, but if it were me, I would know what a plasma cell looks like. That's just me. Kind of crazy that way. I may have seen it pop on a practical or two in the past. I'm not real sure. Okay, so we said all that was loose connective tissue. We get further down in here, you'll start to get back into areas where you can see some dense irregular. There'll still be some little spots or spaces where you see some loose connective tissue, but some dense irregular. Yes, sir?
What's the difference between dense irregular and dense regular? Do we have to identify?
The difference between dense irregular and dense regular, I'll get to dense regular, it's all about the pattern that the fibers run. These fibers, in irregular, they don't all run the same pattern. They can go all kinds of different directions or whatever. Whereas in dense regular, all the collagen fibers are oriented in the same direction.
Is lamina propria interchangeable with loose connective?
The question is lamina propria interchangeable with loose connective tissue? The answer really is no. Lamina propria, it depends upon how the question is asked. And I don't think y'all have to know lamina propria at this point in time. Lamina propria is a layer. Loose connective tissue is a tissue. Now, lamina propria typically is made up of loose connective tissue, but it's answering two different things. What you'll just listen to this and then just forget it as soon as you hear it. But what we're going to learn really soon is, like, this is an organ in the GI tract, so we'll learn there's a mucosa. The mucosa is made up of an epithelium and lamina propria. There's a submucosa and blah, 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 blah. So there's different layers inside of an organ. Lamina propria is one of those layers that makes up the mucosa of an organ. So don't worry about it other than that. Loose connective tissue, lamina propria. The question is, can we see mast cells on this? The answer is no. So I wouldn't have even done mast cells if you hadn't asked me about it. But whatever slide that is, and I'll find it at some point. When you see, here we go. Okay, folks, anybody misses this one tomorrow, it's really good, or whenever it is, Wednesday of next week. It's going to be sad. All right, you see this blue stained slide with these purple shaped cells, all these purple granuled cells inside of it. These are mast cells. There's no other blue stained slide that you're going to see at this point in class. There's no other slide that's going to have purple granulated cells in a blue stained slide. So when you see this one, mast cells. Okay? And while we're saying that, reticular fibers, same thing. When you see this brown stained slide, or whatever you want to call it, brownish, reddish, pinkish stained slide, and you see all these kind of like black fibers running through it, those are your reticular fibers. This is the only brownish, reddish stained slide that's got these black fibers running through it. Reticular fibers. Don't confuse it with elastic in the blood vessel. That looks different, but we'll do that in a minute. But you see all this stuff, and this slide is easy. Mast cells is easy. You're hoping both those slides are on the lab quiz.
Yeah.
Okay? I mean, no doubt about that. Okay. Y'all okay that I'm just jumping around, right? Am I supposed to follow any kind of pattern? Lab quiz won't follow a pattern, so you might as well get used to just jumping all over the place. Okay. So if we found something like this, and let's see, it's on a spot. Okay, so if I were looking at something like this, and I asked you to, are there really cells there? Identify, well, let's identify this cell right here. And we know it's an osteoclast, right? And if I said the space right here, High-Ship's lacuna, we know it's an osteoclast because it's a multinucleated cell. Multiple nuclei inside of it. Identify the cell, osteocyte, identify the space there, lacuna. If I said, identify these cells, bone lining cells, and I found some big plump guys, fat nuclei. You can see like some osteoblasts. That's not the greatest example I've ever seen in my lifetime. Okay, so osteoblasts. That's about to become an osteosome. Okay, let's go back up to the end of the bone. Those are pulled off of the bone. Those are all osteoblasts. Question was, can trabecular bone have osteons also? The answer is no. It is lamellar bone. Okay, so when we're in a view like this, okay, you know that you got zone of resting cartilage. We get down here into kind of zone of proliferation through here, starting to see an increase in the number of cells. Zone of hypertrophy, you're seeing them dying off and actually starting to secrete matrix around themselves. From about right here up, here's your zone, calcified cartilage, zone of calcification. And then down, anytime you start seeing pink around that purple cartilage, you know that you're going into the zone of ossification. So all this little, even though it's little, just a little bit of pink, you're starting to ossify around that cartilage. It's one thing to remember about bone formation as well. And this confuses people at times, but remember, cartilage serves as a scaffold from which bone is going to be formed. You don't convert cartilage into bone, you lay down bone around that cartilage. And then cells will come in, get rid of the cartilage, and become purely bony. You don't convert cartilage into bone. Okay? So the zones should be easy enough. Resting cartilage, resting zone out here, excuse me. Proliferation through here. Hypertrophy. Calcified cartilage. Ossification. And even though this stuff is, we were describing this as woven bone, we're starting to see this newly formed bone, so it's got to be woven bone. Even this stuff out here is woven bone. It's newly formed bone that hasn't had the chance to be degraded. It's just been made. You haven't already come in and mated it, degraded it. This is still woven bone in this area. And it's not till you get out further where you can actually see the lamellar organization where you know you're into secondary and mature bone. Okay. Come out to the...
What cells are getting rid of the cartilage?
Question is, what cells are getting rid of the cartilage? It would be a clastic cell of some sort, and essentially, you'll see some people say that they're osteoclasts. It's really nothing you got to know, so I wouldn't worry about it.
Okay.
But if you're eating cartilage, basically you're a chondroclast.
Okay.
Trabecular bone is lamellar bone. I mean, it can be woven or lamellar.
So then they should be able to.
No,
No,
doesn't have to. All right. You know out here is going to be the periosteum, and it's made up of 2 layers. So you have an outer layer that's going to be thin, flattened cells that will make up your outer fibrogenic layer, and then typically a more thin layer with rounded cells as part of it that will be your inner osteogenic layer. Okay, so all that is your perichondrium. Periosteum. Pardon me. That won't be the last time I say something wrong.
Dr. Spears?
Yes.
How do you tell the difference between the bone lining cells and the osteoblasts?
The difference between bone lining cells and osteoblasts, that both can be found on the outer surface of these trabeculae, is that the bone lining cells will be very thin, flattened cells, almost fibroblastic looking in appearance, whereas the osteoblasts will be much more rounded cells like these guys. Like these, this is better. All these thicker, rounded cells as opposed to these thin, flattened cells. These are inactive osteoblasts that aren't actively making bone at this point in time, whereas these guys are. And really, if we had a better shot, we could probably magnify it up and even see a real light pink layer right next to these guys that would be osteoid, bone that had just been laid down. But that's pretty hard to see on the slide. But you can almost see light pink right through here, and that's your osteoid. It's not just newly laid down bone that hasn't fully mineralized yet. Okay, here's a slide that you don't want to get confused with other things because it's easy to do. At first glance, you might think it's dense, irregular connective tissue. But if you look, it's all oriented in this direction. All the fiber types run like this. So they're all running the same direction. They're not back and forth, kind of going in different directions. It's all in the same direction, with a few scattered fibroblasts interspersed between. So this would be an example of dense, regular connective tissue.
Dr. Spears, sometimes it looks like muscle to me when it's from like a different magnification.
Well, have we had muscle
No,
yet?
so that's what I'm asking.
Okay.
We won't.
Later, I will tell you might get it confused with smooth muscle,
Okay.
but at this point, we haven't had muscle.
Okay.
And you won't get it confused with smooth muscle if you look at this and say, if I were to ask you where are the individual smooth muscle cells, where would you tell me? I don't see any cells. And all the pink, it's just all collagen fibers, bundles and bundles with some scattered fibroblasts or some bigger nuclei that could maybe believe. But if you look at it as a whole, it's definitely dense, regular. And nobody has to know anything about muscle right now, so don't call it a muscle.
Some of the cells on that last one kind of look like they're in lacuna to me. Whenever there are lacuna, would they be more defined?
Question was, some of the cells there look like lacunae. If it were me, I wouldn't hang around Colin when I was studying my histology. He's been smoking some stuff. But I know what you were saying. There's some things, I think there's some artificial spaces that are there, Colin, that you see. And it's not a true lacunae. The thing about it, too, when you see the chondrocytes, they're typically not going to have that big of a nucleus. It's typically more rounded in shape. And I don't know, I think you'll be able to see. That's why you don't focus on one spot. You look all around and get a feel for everything that's there. Okay, here is another type of connective tissue where we see, this is one where you just got to get familiar with this slide. I think, because, oops, let's stay at 5. It's one where all these cells are fibroblasts. Fibroblastic in nature with collagen fibers scattered throughout it. So at first glance, you might think it's dense irregular because you've got all these bundles of collagen fibers. But there's so many cells there, maybe you think it's loose connective tissue because it kind of looks like a combination of the two. That's why it's kind of a specialized tissue that's our embryonic connective tissue. So you just got to get the feel for lots and lots of scattered fibroblasts amongst these bundles of collagen fibers. Plus, if you look, all these cells have that true class. I mean, if you want to show somebody what a fibroblast looks like, this is the perfect place. Because you see all these little skinny, stretched out cells. They're just classic fibroblast in nature. Nucleus with all of its cytoplasm extended out from it. And then you got these bundles of fibers inside of there. Nowhere else do you see these, because these are newly formed fibroblasts and they haven't gone through a further round of differentiation. So they look different than what you'll typically see fibroblasts somewhere else. But classic fibroblasts, all these collagen fibers. You just got to look at this a few times to get the feel for that this is that embryonic connective tissue. No big other hints I can give you for that one. Oops. Yes. I would say embryonic, and that she's got it bold. What's in the back? What's in the list at the back? However, she's got it listed there in the back of the lab is what I would do. I wouldn't say Wharton jelly. I wouldn't say Concord or any other type of jelly. Just say embryonic connective. Sorry, bad histology joke. What can I say? Okay. Some people got it. Some people like Josh, they don't have any sense of humor. They don't get it. Okay. Here's a tissue. Here's an epithelium. You got a free surface. Here's this big, thick layer. Okay. So it's more than one cell layer thick. You see all this stuff getting shredded off the outer surface or whatever. And when we magnify it up, we can see it's no nuclei, dead squames of cells, no nuclei even in this layer. You gotta get all the way down here before you see nuclei again, really. So this is going to be stratified squamous, keratinized epithelium. Okay? Stratified squamous. And then when you look just deep to the epithelium, all this area through here, loose connective tissue. It's loose connective tissue. And then when we get further out, you start seeing that transition from loose to dense, irregular. And then when you get out here, you start seeing big, thick bundles, collagen fibers. This is all dense, irregular. Some more dense, irregular. Some of them just don't have the collagen fibers packed in as much, but that's all dense, irregular. Now, when we look at this, one thing you need to be aware of as well, it's probably better on the other slide than this one. You can see pieces of the duct. Let's go do the other one. Okay, so again, here's the plastic section. It has better histology to it. Here's your stratified squamous, keratinized epithelium. And then just deep to it, looking through here, here's all loose connective tissue, lots of cells in amongst the pink collagen. And when you get further out, just big bundles of, there's some dense irregular, here's some more loose, dense irregular, all through here. And then you get out here in this area, and you start seeing these circular structures. Okay? And so what you're looking at is cut pieces of a simple coiled tubular gland, or sweat gland if you like, which I always do. But when you look at it, what you'll find is typically the areas that are lighter staining, more paler staining in comparison to particularly when you get up into places like this. It's all still pieces of that same thing, darker staining compared to, how many times we're going to do that one today? Darker staining compared to these guys. These are these secretory portions of the gland. And then you always remember D&D, duct darker. The duct stains darker. So Down here is secretory portion. Here's the duct. The duct is usually a bicuboidal epithelium, which is part of the reason why it stains darker in shape. They're usually smaller cells, so that density tends to make them stain darker. Remember, that coiled tubular gland goes all the way out to the surface of the skin. So coursing all through here, you see little cut pieces of that simple coiled tubular gland headed up to the surface. Okay, so it's going to go all the way up. You just don't usually see it go that far. Okay? Dense irregular, some pieces of loose connective tissue, but you definitely see that loose connective tissue up here underneath the epithelium. All loose connective tissue, dense irregular. This is the simple coiled tubular gland, the duct portion of it. Secretory portion. Secretory portion and a little piece of the duct right behind it.
Dr. Spear, is the secretory portion always simple cuboidal?
Is the secretory portion always simple cuboidal? You don't never to say always, but for the most part the answer is yes. Okay, and then we come in and look at this slide. Okay, this also is stratified squamous keratinized epithelium. The difference is, you'll learn soon, this is thin skin as opposed to the thick skin we saw a minute ago. So the layers are thinner, one of the layers is missing, but we still have that outer cornified layer of dead squames of cells, so it's still a keratinized epithelium. So stratified squamous keratinized through here. Still have this loose connective tissue underneath. There'll be lots and lots of dense irregular, and then we get to areas over here where we can see this structure. Now, Dr. Opperman is a very kind and gentle person, so she's probably going to show you, hair follicle in place or something so you can tell what that is. If it were me, I wouldn't do it. I just bring it over here and I go just like this. Because it's easy to tell anyway. That this is going to be what we call a sebaceous gland. Now, how do we know that's a sebaceous gland, not something else? One, next to a hair follicle, if the hair follicle is sitting there. But number two, what I want you to look at is, look at each individual cell itself. This is a gland where you see individual little droplets. Can you see the borders, the outline of what I'm describing here? Each one of these things is a little oil droplet of sebum. Okay? So I always tell people, because I'm all about food, this is kind of like a fried egg. All right? Here's the nucleus in the middle is where the yolk would be. You got all these greasy stuff all over the egg or whatever. So each individual little oil droplet, but I want you to notice the nucleus is in the center of the cell. Always in the center of the cell. Other places you don't see it, but for these sebaceous gland cells, it's always in the middle. And I'll contrast that in a minute from mucous glands that sometimes people get this confused with. Okay? Sebum or oil drop, and you see the individual droplet, nucleus in the middle, it's a dying cell, polycrine secretion. So that's going to be a sebaceous gland. Versus if we go down and look at this guy. Okay. These are another type of gland. So when you look at this, okay, a couple things I want you to notice. First off, where's the nucleus in each individual little cell? The nucleus is out at the periphery of the cell, out here on the outer, really the basal aspect of the cell. When you look at this, can you see kind of fairly large individual oil droplets like you did before?
Is this the review?
Uh-huh.
I got hygiene line here.
Oh, we'll leave. We're just about done.
Sorry.
Actually, we can move to, I didn't know you were going to be here. We'll move to 6.
Okay, okay.
Okay? So here you see individual cells. You can't see individual oil droplets in here. It's just this frothy material. This is a mucus gland. It typically stains purplish in nature. Here are the nuclei. So this whole thing is a secretory, acinar unit. Secretory sinus. Each one is a secretory cell. And if it asks for what type, it would be a mucus gland, or maybe simple brain. I would just call it mucus. Mucus gland. Okay. All right. Let's go move to lab 6, and I'll continue doing what we're doing. If anybody wants to.